marriage is the most important decision you can make. And the consequences of this decision going poorly are quite profound. And it is well documented that children have psychological consequences to divorce. It's also been shown that children actually, if they come from a divorced family, have a lower income later in life. For instance, their wealth declines by about 46%. However, there is data that suggests that remarriage, probably particularly if it's a healthy, positive marriage, can offset that. So those individuals that do remarry have a drop in their mortality over time. Welcome to Foundations First, Health, Strength, and Success. We're building tomorrow, starting today, based on scientific evidence. I'm Dr. Patrick Denard, an orthopedic surgeon with an interest in health and wellness. And in today's podcast, we're talking about the science of long-term marriages and relationships.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Complete Surgical Nutrition. The average American will have 6 surgeries in their lifetime. Evidence shows that nutrition is an important part of recovery. Supplementation can improve speed of recovery and lower the risk of complications. CSN was formulated by surgeons to help optimize your recovery after surgery. If you or a loved one are having surgery, more information is available at www.completesurgicalnutrition.com.
Let me start by saying that I am not an expert in marriage. What I can say is that I have read a lot and learned a lot over time. I was married for 19 years, divorced, have 2 children, and now in another relationship, which is a very wonderful relationship. Not that my ex wasn't a wonderful person. We are simply just different, and our season has passed. But these experiences, I think, have taught me a lot about life and relationships, and I hope to share some of that data in particular with you, because if nothing else, if it can prevent one divorce out there, I think that has done something for somebody. No marriage is the same, but the science on this topic is actually quite interesting. So let's dive into some of this. Now, you've probably heard that marriage is the most important decision you can make. And the consequences of this decision going poorly are quite profound. When we look at the facts, it is very common that we get this wrong. And I think this is particularly important for young people out there thinking about their future life. The facts speak for themselves. 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. The divorce rate is highest among individuals aged 25 to 39. But one of the interesting things is that you're seeing a rising trend in older individuals as well. For instance, in 1990, about 13% of individuals between the ages of 45 and 54 had a divorce. As of 2017, that was up to 18%. If you look at ages 55 to 64, in 1990, that was 5%. And in 2017, that was up to 12%. So those numbers are rising, particularly in that older age group. And this has major consequences. So if we look at financially, the average cost of a divorce is about $13,000. Probably more important than that finance is the impact on children. And it is well documented that children have psychological consequences to divorce. It's also been shown that children actually, if they come from a divorced family, have a lower income later in life. For instance, their wealth declines by about 46%. In addition to that, there are consequences on the individuals. For instance, the risk of mortality after divorce is equivalent to smoking. And we all know smoking is the single biggest thing that you can do to negatively impact your quality of life and longevity over time. However, there is data that suggests that remarriage, probably particularly if it's a healthy, positive marriage, can offset that. So those individuals that do remarry have a drop in their mortality over time. But I think the goal is prevention, right? Nobody wants to get in that position. I certainly would not wish divorce upon anybody. So how do you end up in a healthy, happy, long-term relationship, which I think is the goal for all of us who choose to go down that path? Well, one of the interesting things is just looking at age alone. When do you make this decision to get married. So I will share just personally, I made a decision to get married at an early age on the poor side of the data. So the data indicates that those individuals who get married between ages 20 and 25 have a divorce rate of about 44 to 60%, which is quite high. After age 25, that drops down to 25%. Now that probably there's probably a couple of reasons there. One may be the changes that individuals go through over time, really finding out who they are and having more time to find out who their partner is. And the other thing is that there is an association of divorce with education. So the more educated people are, the less likely they are to get divorced over time. To that point, I would recommend for anybody who is considering marriage or married to continue to educate yourself throughout life, because it is a changing relationship over time. Now, what about personality? So you'll commonly hear opposites attract. So I thought this would be an interesting topic to dive into, to look at what does the data actually tell us? Is the opposite person actually good for me or bad for me? So one of the ways to look at this is the Big 5 personality test. This is a test you can easily go online and take. This looks at 5 factors: your openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, meaning essentially how much do you get worried. And you'll see if you do a test like this, people will say that about 50% of this is genetic and 50% of it is modifiable. In other words, you might be an introvert by nature, but you can modify that by your habits or socialization over time. You might be anxious, but you can drop that down to agree by doing things like mindfulness, etc. In any regard, they looked at relationships in this study, and similarities in openness and agreeableness predicted marital satisfaction. So in other words, individuals that were more similar, specifically in openness and agreeableness, tended to have higher levels of marital satisfaction. So this actually makes a lot of sense. If two couples are open to doing different activities together, going out in the world, traveling, etc., they're more likely to have marital satisfaction. Conversely, if they're both closed, they may actually benefit from being more in the home together because they don't necessarily have those same desires, but it appears that alignment is actually important. Another study in 2021 looked at this same thing. This was 4,000 couples. That previous study I cited was 125 couples. Again, they looked at the Big 5 personality tests, and similar levels of openness, agreeableness, and neuroticism actually predicted higher perceived levels of support. So we talked about the openness and agreeableness. Well, let's talk about the neuroticism. Essentially what this means is that if you have two individuals who are more anxious, they actually feel like that's more supportive of each other because they are similar in that regard. Or if you have two individuals that are on the low anxiousness scale, that shows that those individuals are going to feel similar or supported. But perhaps the worst is if you have an individual who's low on the scale, an individual's high on the scale, because that creates a lot of conflict in between them. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should go out and interview your date and say, hey, take the Big 5 personality test, but probably for yourself, it's something that you can easily do and know a little bit more about yourself. And it's not too hard to pick out these things. And once you start thinking about it in this framework, you can sort of identify how open or agreeable or neurotic somebody is and how well that aligns with your personality. What also goes along with this personality data is values. And there's quite a bit of research that shows that values that are aligned tend to result in happy marriages. So for instance, a 2019 review of 25 articles, primarily in American countries, found that the most prominent aspects of relationships that were linked to marital stability consisted of religion, sexual relationship, commitment, intimacy, and congruency in values and beliefs. Now, again, that doesn't say that you have to both be religious, that is going to result in a longer-term marriage, but that there is a alignment, whatever that is, in helping people have happy marriages over time. And that's not just in the US. For instance, a 2021 study from Portugal found that intrinsic motivation between the individuals led to the highest levels of marital satisfaction. So what is intrinsic motivation? Well, that's really the drive to be in the relationship. So that gets back to the commitment aspect. Do they like doing the same things? Are they intrinsically motivated by this relationship? Do they support each other? So that if we sum this up, those individuals that had higher satisfaction essentially viewed themselves as teammates. Now, what can you do in advance aside from going and testing your personality or knowing something about that and thinking about the other individual and knowing something about your values? Well, it turns out education is actually pretty valuable on this topic. So in one study, premarital education reduced the risk of divorce over 11 years from 52% to 27%. In other words, knowing a little bit in advance and actually taking and investing in a premarital class drops the divorce rate in half. And that is huge if you think about that. And when you think about all these consequences financially, health-wise, and on children, I would advocate to anybody considering marriage to really think about a premarital class. In fact, I think it's a striking deficit in our educational system that we talk about math and science and history, and we don't actually teach young individuals in high school about life and relationships, which is really a long-term valuable skill. So some final thoughts here. I did try to look at data on finances and see how marital satisfaction would really impact somebody's performance over time. There really is a lack of data there. I think we all see, though, there are these power couples who really thrive in an environment because they both feed off of each other. Probably that's related to the fact that they have aligned values. And if you have those aligned values and personality traits, you're both going to be performing at your best rather than fighting a conflict between the two of you. We know, for instance, that sitting next to a high performer increases your performance. So for instance, if you're within 25%, if you're within 25 feet of a high performer, your performance goes up 15%. But if you're around a low performer, it decreases by 30%. So if you think about that, who are you going to spend your most time with? And if you get married, that is going to be the person you spend most of your life with. So being aligned, personality, values-wise, probably, even though the data doesn't support it, is going to help you lead a healthier, more financially successful life. Lastly, there appears to be impacts on your health over time. For instance, multiple diseases have been linked to poor marital satisfaction and divorce. We talked about earlier, increasing mortality. In fact, some studies have suggested that a happy marriage extends your life by 10 years. So yes, this is probably the most important decision you will make for multiple reasons, including your health. Thinking about some of this data and what helps be most likely to lead to a healthy marriage over time, I think is beneficial, particularly for younger individuals. And there's even some work being done that's emerging showing that gene expression can be altered in healthy, happy relationships. So even over time, this can be something that can be shifting. So know the information, know yourself, and best of luck in achieving a happy, healthy, long-term marriage. Thank you for joining us on the Foundations First podcast. I hope you enjoyed that last episode on healthy, happy marriages. If you're so compelled, please leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening on YouTube, like and subscribe. That will conclude our season 1. We'll be back next season with another full line of episodes.